So I just wanted to introduce to you my dear panelists. You already met Toni Kamau, producer of the film The Battlefly Keep Here. She has a Nairobi-based production company, We Are Not the Machine. She's producing award-winning documentaries and collaborating with filmmakers from all around the world. She's working mainly on themes of African innovation, indigenous conservation, among others. And there's so many things I could say about you. I just picked out a few. And you are also board member of the International Documentary Association, IDA. Thomas, you are a researcher. You are a cultural anthropologist. Before that, you trained as a forest engineer. Right now, you're working for the University of Leuven, if that's correct. And you wrote a book. You are the author of Rainforest Capitalism, Power and Masculinity in a Congolese Timber Concession. And for you who didn't see the film, The Tree of Authenticity, he wrote part of the script for that documentary by the Congolese filmmaker Semi Baloji. Then we have Julian Etienne. He's a Climate Story Fund officer and film officer for Doc Society, Climate Story Fund, but you're also working as a programmer in Mexico for the Ambulante Film Festival, or you did that? You did, okay, I correct. And yeah, you are based now in Madrid, and that's about it, I think. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Nisreen El Zaim. She's a climate activist, so to say. She trained as a physics and at the University of Khartoum and also in renewable energy. She has been involved in many organizations you built for climate activism on the local, regional, and international level. You have been part of the advisory group for the United Nations General Secretary. You're taking part in a lot of conferences, like the COP conference, the Munich Security Conference, or the World Economic Forum. So thank you very much for making the time to come to Munich. Yeah, a round of applause. Very good. As I said earlier already, this program is not only about films, but it's also about discussions and engaging in a dialogue between Africa and Europe. So we will talk here, but we also want to talk with you. So whenever you have a question, just point it out. And I think we wanted to start here and then we go to the audience. So that would be the plan, actually. It is the global crisis, the topic of climate change, and I think we are not talking enough about it, and there's a reason for that, because we have so many crises going on in this world. We have wars, we have conflicts, and at the moment the arming of our societies, the advancing of right-wing extremism worldwide, and the deconstruction of the political international order as we knew it for the past 80 years, is drawing our attention away from the existential climate change crisis, which is actually a political crisis as well. So I thought we have to bring it back on the agenda with this program. And as you may know, when talking about climate, we also talk about climate justice. So I was doing research before this panel in the past months, and I just wanted to point out why this topic is so important between the global north and the global south. We are responsible here for the climate change mainly. So we are responsible for more than 50% of the carbon emissions. And for example, Africa, the whole continent of Africa is responsible for 3%. And just listening to these numbers, I just wanted to give it as a foundation also for this discussion. This imbalance raises questions about justice, about climate justice. So, and as we have seen in the film, The Battle for Laikipia, the vulnerable communities in African countries are suffering the most by the consequences of climate change, like the herders, the indigenous communities. So they are affected the most by climate change. And now I'm come to my first question, actually to Tony, because we've just seen your film. You're showing us this conflict between the conservationists, the white farmers, and the herders. Was that your starting point, or was climate change actually your starting point for this film? And what do you, maybe you first say that.
Yeah, the project started in... So let me just dial back a little bit and give you some quick context. So Daphne, one of the directors, worked in Kenya in roughly 2008, 2009, at the UN after she did her master's program in environmental studies. And she worked there for about 5 years. And when she was living and working in Kenya, she had white Kenyan friends, so she interacted with them socially. And then she was also working with pastoralists, and indigenous communities in Kenya, mostly in like Turkana, Garissa, and she was working climate change adaptation. And when she met her friends and who were white Kenyans and went to their friends' conservancies, then she saw aspects of the story play out, because the Laikipia area has a lot of large conservancies. And when she started interrogating the issue, asking questions, understanding about the land issue, she was curious, and felt that it would be better explained through a film. So she went to film school. She quit her job and went back to film school, did her master's at UC Berkeley, and started making films about, the impact of climate change, about migrants. One of her first films was a short called 4.1 Miles. That was about a Greek captain who was rescuing immigrants in the Aegean Sea. And she stayed on that boat for like a month. And also Pete has also been interested in telling stories of vulnerable communities affected by climate change. So when we started making the film, our entry point was actually talking about the historical land injustices and identity and belonging, and how people, identity is tied to land ownership or their relationship with the land, and how Laikipia... An interesting thing about Laikipia is that there are two very different points of view on how people can relate to land. For the pastoral communities, for them, they don't have the land tenure system that's Western-based, where you own a parcel of land as an individual, you fence it off, and no one else can access it. For them, their access to, their relationship with land is partly temporal. Like, we walk through the land, we buried our father here, someone was born in this other part of the land, and for us, we feel that we have the right to graze it, and we're stewards in that way, but we cannot prevent other people from accessing it. So the idea of fences is something very foreign. And we thought that was an interesting thing to explore. So that was our initial entry point. And then the drought was a catalyst, for increasing the conflict over the resources. And we integrated it into the story when we saw how much it was playing a role as well.
Okay. So how does the legacy of colonialism continue to shape the climate injustice in post-colonial Kenya? Could you say something to that?
I don't know how to say that in a few minutes.
But we also can put it...
I don't know how to say that in a few minutes. In multiple ways. I think there's multiple ways. I would say just the idea of land ownership on the continent in many spaces. There's some communities like indigenous pastoral communities where the current land tenure model maybe is not the best model. Like in the Masai Mara, where they have conservancies, some Masai communities and conservancies are bringing down fences. They were given title deeds by the government by the previous government, Uhuru Kenyatta's government. So the indigenous pastoralists in Masai Mara were given individual titles like 10 acres, etc. But the fences were causing human-wildlife conflict. So there's a conservancy called Nashlai where they all came together, about 100 families, and brought down their fences. Yeah, so that cattle, wildlife could have unrestricted movement, and that reduced human-wildlife conflict. So I would just say that even how we look at land has been affected, by colonialism, because they introduced that land tenure model. And I would also say it's a bit more controversial. I don't know if you want to go there, but also like carbon credit trading schemes that are happening on the continent. Kenya has been affected specifically. For me, that's a form of neo-colonialism, because the carbon credit trading schemes means that the indigenous communities, are removed from the lands that they've lived in for a very long time. And instead of having conversations about how can we ensure that these indigenous communities, how can they have sustainable livelihoods? They just kicked off, because carbon credit trading schemes means you can't have cattle, you can't have people. And FYI, a lot of conservancies were taking part in carbon credit trading schemes, but we couldn't, that wasn't the film. But DW did a really good online documentary about that.
Okay, thank you. This actually leads me directly to Thomas. We were talking about this trading before in the Q&A after your film. Maybe you take the mic. And so let's travel to Congo, where the Tree of Authenticity, the film, is based. And how are the communities there affected by global this carbon trading system? Can you repeat that again?
Yes. So the Congo is in the process of what's called a RED Plus program, so a RED Plus system. It's reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So it's a system in which Western companies buy carbon credit from actors in the South who promise or who actually do not cut down trees. So it's by avoiding deforestation that you have the production of these carbon credits. And how do you avoid, or how does the government and international organizations want to avoid deforestation? It's by focusing on small-scale farmers who do what is called slash and burn farming, and which is seen as a major cause or driver behind deforestation. So it's about trying to induce behavioral change in these poor farmers who actually do not contribute at all to the global climate crisis we're in, and who are now, all of a sudden seeing projects, money coming in, trying to induce them to do something, and they're actually the victims also of what's happening. So I think we see very old colonial logics, colonial extractive logics being played out again in forms of green capitalism, like in carbon trading schemes. Yeah,
that's very interesting, yeah. And in the film, we can also see that there is a relation between the colonial past and how extraction at that time was done, and now is transforming into absorption, like carbon dioxide absorption by the rainforest in the Congo Basin. So just to take the audience with us, could you elaborate on that a bit? This global climate economy and what role, global role the Congo plays in that.
Yeah, so the Congo has played an enormous role in the development of capitalism, which is the main driver of which was and still is the main driver of climate crisis. Slave trade, palm oil, rubber. There are no automobile industry without rubber, and rubber was one of the main products that the Congo was extracted from the Congo. And today there is a resurgence of interest in the Congolese rainforest because it's seen as this carbon sink, this place where carbon is sequestered out of the air, out of the atmosphere, second in importance after the Amazonian rainforest. And there is not enough data about the Congolese rainforest. So you have all kind of scientific projects, climate scientists, trying to measure and model the forest to build models for predicting climate change and the way in which climate change will impact the forest. So, and also there, even in these well-intentioned and very urgent and necessary scientific projects to find out how to deal with what we're in, you can see, again, some colonial structures of inequality and injustice, because who is producing the data, whose labor is being exploited, who gets paid what, who wins, who loses. It's all very, very complicated and very tricky sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you for these important insights. Let me now go to Julian. DOK Society has two main themes. It's climate change and it's democracy. And you do all to make sure that awareness is raised for these issues. Maybe you can tell us a bit how documentary film comes in that sense, and what it can do, and why you fund documentaries talking about climate change.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Can I just take a step back and go back to the beginning when you were mentioning that you think we don't speak enough about climate? And I just wanted to say that that's not a coincidence. Fossil industry invests $1 billion a year on climate disinformation. I'm not being a conspirationist. This has been documented by investigative journalists. No? And what we believe in DOK Society is that culture has the power to shape society, shape and transform society. And we believe that by supporting not one single story, no, but a constellation of stories around climate justice, stories that are close to frontline communities, no, told from their perspective, that we can make an impact in how we envision a more just future. No, so that's we call that cultural strategy, and our role is to support filmmakers and impact producers, not to conduct their work, but also do a more system-wide work to try to influence cultural organizations, festivals, public broadcasters, so that climate is an integral part of their programming decisions.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So, Nisrin, you are a political figure, kind of. You're shaping politics or policies.
You want to bring me problems?
No. And now you are at the film festival. So, how is documentary films about climate change or climate justice of use for you? Is it something you can work with or relate to? Maybe you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, actually, I'm working in a topic which is called climate change, peace and security, which is how climate change induce security issues and disrupt peace, just like we saw in the video or in the film. And the other side on how conflict can actually make the climate impacts even worse. And believe me, 5 years ago, when I used to go to people and say, well, this is happening and climate change actually make conflicts happen. And also when there is a conflict, there's still climate change happening and it's still affecting people's life. They say, well, there is no scientific proof that climate change and security and peace are linked. Well, now I don't think we need a scientific proof. We have a real life proof.
Yeah, we've just seen it. Yeah,
we've just seen it. And I'm also a bit sad that, I'm happy that this is happening. I'm just sad that as humans, we are still in a position where things have to happen. And we have to document it happening before we actually take action to it. I thought we are the most intellectual creature, but all of the animals actually anticipate. And they create herd immunity, and they create a lot of things in advance to the problems of falling. The birds, they move when they feel a storm coming. They don't wait for the storm to come before moving. Bears and most of the animals, they hide food before the winter. They don't wait for the winter to say, oh, we are starving because we don't have food, because they know winter is coming. So I think we are definitely not the most intelligent creature. But we keep claiming it, and I think this is just, I don't know what to say. But I'm just glad that there is proofs to this, and there is so many much stories untold. I give you another example, very small example. I had the privilege of, and you will know now why it's a privilege, to talk to some young soldiers who were part of Boko Haram. You know Boko Haram? It's a terrorist group in sub-Saharan Africa. And they all had one main reason for joining Boko Haram, which is the drought in Lake Chad. They lost their livelihood, they lost their prestige in the community, and the only way to have income and prestige was also actually by joining such a movement, very terrorist, very radical movement as Boko Haram. Another example, in 2017, we did a survey where 1,500 young people from Sudan, especially in Darfur and the areas that is both impacted heavily by conflict and climate change, about migration. And actually out of the 1,500, we got 84% of young people saying that they will cross the Mediterranean illegally to Europe, even if there is 90% chance that they will not make it to the other side. And the percentage kept getting higher as we drop the percentage. I mean, I think we had 100% when we reached 80. So 100% said if there is 20% chance to make it to the other side of the Mediterranean, they will do it. And for me, this is a suicidal behavior because they don't have any reasons for hope. And it's not something you can really solve by military or by controlling the borders, or in that case, by putting fence, for example.
Mm. Thank you. Talking about these untold stories and many narratives that are there, I think that's a big problem, because as we react a lot to pictures and to the images on our newsfeed. If it's not there, it's not happening somehow. So we need filmmakers to document these stories. And at this point, I would love to bring in Don Atkins. He's a producer from South Africa, Cape Town, and at the moment developing stories with filmmakers from around Africa about climate change and climate justice. So maybe, Don, can you just bring the mic? Yeah, one of us.
Oscar can share the roaming one.
Yeah, and we share this one. Yeah. So Don, tell us a bit more why you're doing this huge project, I don't know, maybe with 20 productions, and why you're taking this on and why it's important for you.
It's about 28 productions from 21 countries across the African continent. And I think it is because there's so little information in the media on the continent about climate and the effects of climate change and about climate justice, that we really need to use the power of documentary film to engage audiences. And so I think, yes, the stories are extremely important, but the next step is by taking the stories to the communities across the continent so that they have the spaces and the opportunities to talk amongst themselves what they're going to do about the situation. Also to bring up the role of activists and also the hope that young people bring into this. Because remember, Africa's got the highest population of young people in the world, and that's a real opportunity because they have hope. And we need to utilize that hope and expand it and show what can happen in Africa, because what's happening in Africa can also be used around the world. if you look recently at what's happening in Rwanda, by electrifying all these scooters in the country, I mean, that is a big step towards changing the emissions in a city that I think other countries can adapt, and that's coming out of Africa. So I've just got a question and I really thank you that you brought these two films in that deal with colonialism and the effects of colonialism. And Tony, I thought, sorry if I'm going off target here, but Tony, following your film, have there been attempts of finding adaptation ways of dealing with the situation in terms of the communities and the authorities involved in all of this?
Yeah. In terms of, like, after this film came out, in terms of, like, dealing with climate justice or anything around land or anything around, like, mitigating the conflict, sadly, nothing specifically is happening with regards to the authorities, although there are some conservancies that there are organizations like Impact in Laikipia that are dealing with climate adaptation with pastoral communities, and also doing a lot of advocacy work around that through film, through engaging with the local authorities, through lobbying the different conservancies, and also through Impact has been traveling across Kenya for a while, documenting the stories of the Ma community and the Samburu community, which were dispossessed, during the colonial era. So there's the Land Commission in Kenya, and they're going to take the case there. I think they'd lodged the case in the process of pursuing that, because I think land justice is tied to climate justice, at least in this specific context. However, there are some specific there are some specific conservancies that are working much closer with pastoral communities. In fact, someone else is making a film about that, and one of them is using indigenous approaches to resource management when it comes to grass. They're saying that actually it's good to let the pastoralists in and eat all the grass, because that means when they eat all the grass, it can grow back again, and it'll be, and it'll regenerate. And that's actually good for the grass. That's actually good for the community. And they're engaging with them in terms of cattle ownership and helping them get drought-resistant cattle, and helping them replenish their stock when the cattle when there's a drought. So there are some conservancies that are closely collaborating with them, and we've had more of those stories. And I think there's also just greater awareness amongst the conservancy community about there's been a gap between implementation and what's on people's websites. And I feel like now there's like a lot of the conservancies are doing some deep soul searching, and we've had screenings with them, talking about if you truly want to say that you're inclusive, well, you have to, it has to be actionable, and there has to be evidence around that. Yeah.
Could I follow that one more thing, Barbara? Something that's come out of our own research and some of the stories that are in the project that we're working on is the effect of climate change on traditional societies. And you see this coming through very much in your film, and I think this is something that people don't really understand, how a society like the Samburu or the Fulani or the Maasai, with hundreds of thousands of years of a lifestyle, are now having to change their lifestyle. And what tools are they being given in order to be able to do that? Because it's not a small thing to take on, but it is a big change for traditional communities and indigenous people across the continent. And I think that's something to bring up quite in a big way.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, in Sudan, we have a similar situation because the farmers used to divide the rainy season into what they call it eyes. So we have 13 different eyes. And why they call it eyes is because they symbol the sky as an eye and the amount of rain as tears. So we definitely have 13 types of crying, basically. And they grow the seeds and they do all of the agricultural activities according to these 13 divisions. And it depends, of course, on how heavy the rain will fall. And in some of the work in the community and the interviews we had with the farmers and so on, a lot of the younger farmers were saying that their fathers are actually having a lot of what they call it isolation. But then we had psychologists and psychiatrists working with us, and we discovered that it's just a depression, because anything they knew before and all of the knowledge they inherited from their ancestors and grandfathers and so on is no longer valid or working. They feel useless, basically. And convincing them that this is not you being useless, is not you betraying the knowledge that your ancestors give you, is something that you don't have hand in. The world is changing and there's climate change and it's not your fault. And enabled a lot of people to really open to new informations and new ways of lives, because in a lot of cases it's not the tools that you give it to them, but the acceptance that they have to change, unfortunately, because there's no other way.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Maybe we do a first round of comments and questions. Don't be shy. Otherwise, we continue here. Oh, no, there's one.
How long did it take to film the documentary?
Yeah, so we did most of the filming from 2017, when there was a very severe drought in Kenya, and at the same time there was an election. So there was a lot of tension in Laikipia, over the natural resources. There was a lot of talk about land reparations as part of people's political campaign platforms. So that's when we started filming. And then we filmed on and off for 5 years. We filmed 300 hours of footage in total. Okay. Yeah. So Daphne and Pete were filming mostly on the ground, because they direct and they also film on the camera. And they spent sometimes months at a time, maybe with Simeon, and his family, when they migrated a lot of times. We don't even remember how many times they migrated during the drought. And we spent months maybe with Simeon when we got funding, and then also spent months with the Dodds family. So we did most of our filming in 2017, 2018, and 2019, 2020 we didn't manage to film because of COVID, and then 2021 and some filming in 2022. But it was 300 hours in total, and we also had additional cinematographers who were in the credits who would go and film some of the scenes when the directors were not available. Yeah.
Can I have one more question?
Mm-hmm.
Do the people who are shown in the documentary, have they seen it?
Yes, before we released it, because it had its premiere at Sundance, we did show the documentary to all the characters at different stages, all the key characters. Yeah.
How did they feel about it? Seeing it afterwards, after this conflict was.
There were different reactions. For Simeon, because we had a private screening with Simeon, his wife, and the kids. And for him, it was very emotional to watch it, because I was 20 to 23 when a lot of the conflict had subsided, and it was difficult for him to watch that, because even some of the people who were in the film had passed away. Some of it was related. Okay, there's some stuff I can't say because this panel is being recorded. But yeah, so for him it was very difficult to watch it just because some of the people who were in the film had passed away. For the Dodds family, it was very emotional for them because they were seeing Maria. For certain characters, they felt, they were conflicted about the film, like in terms of like feeling that maybe they weren't fairly portrayed, or feeling like the other side wasn't fairly portrayed. But we had discussions about it, and we reached an understanding, because we had always told everyone from the beginning that we were filming both sides. We never lied about that. Like even the politician, we said like we're filming everyone. The Dodds family knew we were filming with Simeon, and Simeon knew we were filming with everyone. Like everyone knew what was going on. And also, there's no way we could have lied because Laikipia is not that big, so they would have seen us. Yeah, yeah. But we were honest about the fact that we were getting access from all sides.
Thank you very much, and for the wonderful film.
Thank you. Some more questions, or we make another round here.
Yes, I have the microphone.
Yeah, there.
This
Sorry,
was a very deep picture of this area. Do you, in some years, think about or consider a second movie, seeing how people adapt, how people cope with it, what changes are going on?
You have 300 hours.
You can make a follow-up.
Yeah, I think that's something that we would potentially consider. Maybe not with the 300 hours because it's capturing a different moment, but I think that's something we would, potentially consider, in the future. I think there are a few things that need to play out. Yeah, but I think we'd consider maybe with different people, maybe not necessarily the same people, because I think when we go back, we would hopefully be going back to see like who's trying to change things. That's what we'd want to tell a story about, rather than repeating this narrative. Yeah, so that we would go back if there was that potential to tell that kind of story. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also wanted to add something.
Well, it's super interesting the amount of time that you spent, and I just wanted to add something that, from our perspective, is interesting that we receive more than 500 applications per year, and the Climate Story unit is around 5 years old, and it's really inspiring to see that directors and producers, they are not doing just a one-off film, or short about climate justice. Their next film also deals, different story, but also dealing with climate justice, and that for me gives me a lot of hope too.
Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to ask, actually, the both of you, talking about impact. I mean, you said you showed the film to the protagonists, but what do you do with the film in Kenya now? And if DOK Society is also supporting like impact campaigns and stuff like that. Is that touching on a difficult point?
Is this a difficult point between you and us? No? Okay.
Hopefully.
We support the impact work of our grantees in different ways. Of course, we provide them funds directly for their impact campaign, but they also go through week-long impact lab with us each year, and we cover also the expenses of an impact strategist. We introduce them to potential funders, and we have some top-up grants available when they reach certain of their goals, or the team has certain momentum, or they are at a critical stage, they can receive additional funding. That's what we do with the fund. But the Climate Story Unit has two other legs. One is the Climate Story Lab, and these are gatherings organized by local partners around the world. We have organized 21. Actually, Africa has organized the most Climate Story Labs, For example, Kenya has organized 3 editions. And these labs, their goal is to create the support network, no? Between academics, researchers, journalists, potential funders, and storytellers to support climate justice storytelling projects from their inception through their launch. And then the third leg of the Climate Story unit is the Climate Story Kitchen, and that's like our little research and development kitchen, for lack of a better word. And right now we are focused on supporting the amplification and distribution of climate justice stories, no? Because a lot of films are being made, whether we support them or not, but there's a big bottleneck in terms of distribution, and not enough stories are reaching their target audiences. So one little initiative that we supported in Kenya, we partnered with the Nation Media Group, no? And they created a slot, no? To program climate justice stories, no? And it's one of the most important broadcasters in East Africa for sure, but the whole continent, Tony? No, East Africa.
Excellent. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, Doc Society gave us a lot of support, for this project when we were in production, and taking part in the Climate Story Lab was, very helpful for us because it happened actually before the Hot Docs Forum pitch. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, and it was wonderful because we were connected with other climate change, storytellers. For example, like Alex Pritz, the director for The Territory. It's a brilliant film that talks about, Brazilian activists, who are fighting against settlers, logging trees and creating new settlements in the Amazon. Despite it being such an important water catchment area. So it was great to connect with all of these filmmakers. Even there were South African filmmakers who were there, doing a series on climate change, climate stories. And it was great to connect with people and understand like how they're telling their stories, what their strategies are, and also learning from each other. In terms of like our impact campaign, we have a phased approach for how we want to deal with impact. And for us, the first thing, because it's always a tricky thing with documentaries, in Kenya specifically, I don't want to speak for everywhere else, but a lot of people think documentaries are boring NGO things where you're interviewing the, head of partnerships about, sorry, I don't mean it in a bad way. I hope there's no head of partnerships here. But about, the number of partners and, like impact and it's, so a lot of people just have a perception of documentaries that it's boring. It's, it's vegetables, it's broccoli with no... with no spices or anything. And I think part of our work as storytellers, at least in Kenya, because we have such a nascent industry, is education, is educating our audiences that documentaries, are about, showing people's lived experiences. Because in Kenya, we also don't really have a canon of what it means to be Kenyan. We don't have this collective canon of like, this is who we have been, this is what our culture is. Even for us, when we were making this film, it was very important for us to show what cattle meant to the Samburu. And I think another film could be made about that that's going much deeper into it. But for us, it was important for Simeon to articulate that because many times, even in Nairobi, people are like, but why do these guys want to keep cows? See, they can just farm or do something else. But cows are... cattle are a huge part of their identity, and how they interact with the world, how they see themselves. And we wanted to put that there because none of us had seen it. Even just the idea of Simeon saying, you guys call us bandits. We're not bandits. In Kenyan mainstream media, whenever they were talking about this story of, you know, the conflict, they referred to Samburus as bandits, and they do that. And for us, it was important to get him to say that, you know, because language is important, you know, in terms of how you refer to different groups of people. And so for us, sorry, I'm going to shorten it.
It's okay.
So for us, it was really important to get this into the mainstream and not just preach to the choir. So the first thing we did as part of our impact, because we got some money to do the impact plan and also do a little bit of work around the release. So what we wanted to do was eventize, you know, turn the release into an event that was accessible to people outside of the climate change choir. You know, because also when you do documentary plus climate change plus like that Venn diagram doesn't really excite people. No offense, climate change and doc, you know, unless maybe sometimes. So what we did was it premiered as part of a festival called NBO Film Festival, and they had a big party, like a big launch. 500 people came. It was people from, and it also had like mainstream filmmakers, like people who do fiction, people who do comedies, so they were invited, and then they attended the premiere. And then we had a lot of people talking about it on social media because we used part of the impact money to pay for a social media communicator, you know, to be able to share the story. We had hashtags, so there were vloggers who picked up the narrative. There's this there were very famous like journalists who have YouTube channels with millions of views who even picked up the story and started doing their own interviews, you know, with people in indigenous communities, with white Kenyans who have been there, who are, you know, talking about like the identity and talking about land ownership and talking about colonialism. Like the people were doing series of topics around it. And this happened because we figured we did the eventizing, and then we did a theatrical release in Nairobi cinemas. So over 3,100 people paid to watch it in cinemas. Mm-hmm. And then we did the broadcast, and now we're doing educational screenings with educational institutions so that future policymakers can be able to engage with this content. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that's what we're doing right now.
A lot of work. Wow. Thank you. Looking at the time, I wanted to... No, that's fine. Thank you. That's so interesting. I wanted to give the audience again the chance to jump in and ask questions or give comments and engage in the conversation. Maybe there are other filmmakers. Yeah, there's a comment over there.
Hi, thank you. I had a question for Tony. Just talking about your impact program, I wanted to know if you planned it before starting to shoot, or it was something you planned just after editing the film? Is it something you had to structure just before and thinking about it to your impact campaign or not?
We had an idea of our impact campaign in terms of one really big thing for us was just creating awareness about the issue, and also you know, bringing this to be part of the public discourse with context, because when this was in the mainstream news, like in 2017, it was always one side of the story that was being told. So that was a big part of what we wanted to do with Impact, was create mass awareness in Kenya, and also with people who fund conservation in the country. We designed most of our impact, though, towards the end of production, when we had a clear idea about what the film was. Like that's when we did the meat, the actual campaign, impact campaign design, because it's sometimes hard to know what the film will be until you have most of the footage, and we really crystallize it halfway through post, when we actually knew what the 300 hours would look like in a 1.5 hour film. Yeah.
Tony's been really humble. They had a powerful impact vision, and working on the impact while still in production or post-production, it's an anomaly. Most teams wait after, because they're so busy finishing the film, wait after the festival release to start thinking about impact. And when they were pitching the film, when they premiered the film, they were ready to share with audiences, what they wanted to do with the film.
Thank you on clarifying on that. Yeah, there's also a question. Excellent. So we also have 2 more panelists here on this side. Don't forget
don't
about
mind.
them.
I also have questions for Tony, so
Okay.
it's my turn.
Yes, this is a question for you, Nesreen. What experience did you have at the Munich Security Conference speaking about this biggest security issue? Because Europe is spending now hundreds of billions of euro against, for rearming. There we have money. But the biggest enemy is climate change. And there we are wasting hundreds of billions of euro. And this is, I think, the biggest colonial problem again. Yeah. Europe first against the rest of the world.
Well, if we looked very briefly in the history, armifying any issue never worked. It always produced a bigger problem. But we never learn from history. And again, we are not the most clever of species. So, but I think people normally act because of fear. And this is what we very clearly saw in the movie. Everyone was so scared, and scare took them to take irrational decisions. And I've read a book, I forgot the name of the author, but he's a French man, and he said actually the part of our, I don't 100% know medically if that's true, but he said that the part that is responsible for taking decisions is the lower part of the head, and it's basically the caveman part, where it's about having as much possible power and having as much possible sex, basically. And these two things are very much linked. Why? Is because having sex a lot means that you have a lot of kids, and having more kids means you have more power. And this can change in different ways into, for example, instead of kids, that means arms or tanks or whatever. But it really never worked, you know? And I think currently one of the issues that we are facing right now is that instead of solving the problem, we are basically exporting it to somewhere else. The Middle East is on fire. India and Pakistan are on fire. Africa is on fire everywhere. Congo is in conflict for many years. And then everyone talks about electrifying things like electric motorcycles, electric cars. But where do you get the semiconductors to make the batteries for this electrifying? It's Congo again. So wherever there is resources, people think it's useful, then you create conflict so you can use these resources uncontrollably, unsupervisioned, and of course, no one can ask for their rights, because the word right was mentioned many times in the film, but no one really knew where to go and how to do it to take their rights. And Kenya is not in conflict not now, let alone if a country is in conflict. I'm currently creating a network for 27 countries, for over 350 organizations in countries in conflict around the world, all the way from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, passing by the Middle East, Africa, all the way to Venezuela and Colombia. And guess what? People want to survive, and they are surviving in a very small, vibrant way. And then maybe this is what takes us back to the importance of the documentary. Maybe if the world leaders saw it in their eyes that making more weapons and having more spent on militia will not solve the problem, we will just take it somewhere else, and this somewhere else will come back to them. Just like COVID. COVID started in China, and the second thing we know, the whole world was very much infected with COVID. So borders are actually not there. It's not like fences. It's just something on the map and maybe on the GPS, but on reality, there's no borders. And climate change doesn't know any borders too.
Thank you. We have another question, Modupe.
Thank you. I haven't seen the film yet. When is it screened again? That's the first question.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
Tomorrow evening.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to address my question to Nesreen and Julian, because I think in Sudan and Congo, the most heaviest wars are raged, and it's not part of the narrative, the climate narrative. And how do you see the stakeholders behind it? Because there is an ambiguity in the narrative talking about climate change on one hand and how it affects us as the Western world, but not addressing the issue of wars in Sudan and Congo and millions of refugees having being displaced. Really millions, I don't know how many, I think in Congo and Sudan, 12 million or so. So I would like to, ask you that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So basically, for Sudan alone is 12 million. So maybe when we add Congo, then the number is quite bigger. And I said this yesterday because yesterday they were showing the film Khartoum. It is about the conflict in Khartoum. But during the conflict, and it's one of the situations where the UN declared it is as a worst humanitarian case ever. And like, a lot of people don't know even it exists. But when I was talking to people, NGOs, civil society organizations, and UN agencies and everything, I said, guys, we also need to keep climate change in radar, because climate change will not say, oh, these people have conflict, I give them a break, I go to other countries and then I come back. It will keep hitting even if people have war, and you have to be prepared for both. Unfortunately, this is our destiny. What can we do? But they said, no, don't worry now, let's focus on saving people's life. And I was like, guys, but this is also saving people's life. And even before I finished what I was saying, we were hit by a flood, one of the worst floods. The area that was flooded is bigger than Germany in size. And it was unfortunately the 5 states that are considered the most safe. So more than 5 million people fled to these states. And guess what? Before they realized they had to flee again, because they woke up and water was until their necks. And the flood was actually, how can I say it? It was anticipated by many organizations like the IGAD and many other organizations who said this year Sudan will have a flood. And before the flood, we had cholera. So, and then I was telling some of the organizations that the places you put the cholera isolation center is actually a flood path. But no one listened again. And when the flood happened, everything, the clinic, the medical waste, the patients, everything was flooded. So you can imagine the size of the cholera we had after that. It was a huge breakout in the country. And many, many more cases. We had the same case in Syria when a lot of organizations said, well, we'll have a huge problem because this will be the worst winter. And we have more than 24 in different places in different countries who are actually living under tents with a very thin like plastic bags only. And I mean, I can tell in many, many regions where basically people think they have bigger fish to fry than climate change and stopped talking about it and planning for it. And then climate change is like says, surprise, motherfuckers, I'm here, basically. And this is exactly what happens, because it says I'm here in a very bold expression and very devastating most of the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe just a few words about Congo. The wars in Congo, I mean, words just fall short of describing the misery that it's causing and has been causing for a long, long time. And international community is really falling short, like cruelly, to do something or help solving the problem there. I just wanted to pick up on something Nisreen also said. The Congo has a lot of mineral resources that have become very important in the energy transition towards electrification. And then when I hear Rwanda and their actions being cited as a good model to follow, you know, the electrification of all the motorcycles, Rwanda is stealing, and a lot of the resources from the Congo is playing a very devastating role in the Congo wars. So, and it's also an authoritarian state. So, I mean, I should be careful a little bit when looking at Rwanda as a model to follow. I mean, it's obviously a state that has the power to impose very violently the new rules, even if these rules are green. Maybe we can call it a kind of green authoritarianism sometimes. Yeah.
I remember the film Blood Diamond. Maybe it's cobalt diamond. Oh, sorry, blood cobalt or blood lithium or wherever, but it's just the same. And one more thing about having electrification, scooters need roads to be driven in. I mean, and it needs electricity to charge. So 70% of Africa don't have access to electricity in the first place. So maybe electric vehicles is not the best. And also it have only 20% infrastructure of roads. So even maybe vehicles is not our problem at the moment. So guys, come up with a better idea, please.
Yeah. Oh, there's one more question. Thank you.
Thank you. As we can see the frequency and severity of droughts increasing in the future, what kind of adaptation strategies have you seen that look promising and successful to the local people who are really affected by it? And have there been any maybe political or corporate activities that you have witnessed that could support this successfully?
Okay. I'll do a small exercise with all of the audience. How many times you have been told you need to close the light in your room before going out for the environment? All of you? Yeah? Okay. What is the most polluting institute in the world? Any guesses? One institute. It have a name. No? Someone said military, but which military specifically? Yes. So the US Army have more emissions than Africa and West Asia, basically. And Africa have 3% of emissions, but if you took South Africa, Nigeria out, then Africa have only 1% of emissions. So if you ask me, the best way to adapt to climate change is to mitigate emissions. We have to stop the emissions. And as much as science is evolving and transforming, we are still not there to have carbon capture mechanisms where we can actually capture carbon. And all of the methods now prove to have even bigger impact on the environment, so it's not working. So the only way that the Western world sees is to find, as Julian said earlier, places where they can call it carbon sinks, where we have all the trees, but you have all the industry, you know? And then the power dynamic continues, because then our GDP will basically be forests, and your GDP will be basically cars and solar panels and whatever. And then the development will continue here, and the disdevelopment will continue there. So it's another way for continuing whatever is happening in the world right now. And I think as citizens, all of us, it's time to say enough is enough. We really want a clear path where we have social justice and climate justice, because both are two sides of one coin, basically.
Thank you very much. There was, I think, someone behind here in the back also waiting.
We can continue the talks and the mingling afterwards. Yeah. So I'm
okay,
here.
Maybe one last comment here, though. There's no comment.
In what way does digitalization play into that? I mean, all of us do have our handies, and there is an increasing demand for it. So, does that in some way influence the climate debate?
Well, if you're asking about AI, for example, and I get this question a lot. So AI is actually a tool, but then what are the providers for AI? how many supercomputers we need, how many servers we need, how are we going to use these servers, where are we going to produce energy for these servers. And this question I also normally ask people, because they say, I mean, going back to again to the electrification or even the solar panels. Solar panel is the cleanest energy ever, right? But how are we producing solar panels? What is the process to manufacture the actual physical solar panel is the question. The electric cars is the clean cars, for example, but also how we manufacture the body, the tires, everything that the car is actually using to walk, you know, or to have a car in the first place. So everything have a negative impact, but as a scientist from my background, which is physics and renewable energy, I tell you, everything have a good side, and we can definitely minimize the good and maximize the good and minimize the bad. It's just it costs a lot of money and time, and we don't have time. We have money, but no one wants to use it, you know.
Thank you. Looking at the time, I think we have one final round. I would love to hear from all of you. Maybe a last note, a comment about climate justice and what needs to be done, what can be done on a positive note. We heard a lot about language, maybe education. So what would your ideas be and what we can do?
So currently, I think we have more things in common than things that divide us. And one way of me working was to bring people together. And my small contribution to the world is now the network that I'm working on. And it's not ready yet. There's a lot of nitty-gritty details. But I think together we can really find something and a way out. We just need to be willing to do it. And we need to be willing to sacrifice some of all the privilege we have, so we can have more equal world, but also more sustainable world.
Reducing emissions in the West instead of looking at places like Africa for solutions to problems that we have caused and our history has caused. That's my thing. And how to do it, I'm not an expert on that.
As simple as that.
Yes, yeah. Simple as that. Shifting mindsets, maybe.
Yeah, thank you very much. Tony?
Yeah, I believe in the power of story to change minds and hearts. And I also believe in collaborations that are mutually respectful. The only way this film could have happened is if we all listened to each other, because it's 3 continents came together to make this film. And usually what happens when there's global North, global South collaborations, it's usually extractive. It's a replication of colonial models where the white person comes and says, this is how the story is going to be told, and then that's how the story is told. And I think what we ended up doing, we had difficult conversations about perspective. We had difficult conversations about language. We had difficult conversations about history, you know, as the team, because there was a Greek woman, there was a male director who's Kenyan, you know, I'm a woman, I'm Kenyan. So also we had conversations about gender. You know, there's a lot of intersectionality in all of these issues. There's a white woman who's American, there's an African-American EP, but just because, you know, he sees things very differently from an American lens and I see things from an African lens. So we had to have all of these difficult conversations that made the editing harder, but I think it's important for us to find ways to listen to each other and to listen to each other's stories, and also to consume stories from around the world, because it makes it richer. You know, it makes us understand who we are and what our priorities are, and it makes us, I think, better humans. So I would just say, like, support storytellers, and also if you're a filmmaker from the global North, when you're working with global South filmmakers, listen to them, you know? And have mutually respectful collaborations where there's equitable, it's an equitable relationship where everyone is contributing to telling the story and not just tokenism. Yeah, thanks.
Great.
It's really hard being the last.
I'm sorry about that. such a powerful statement.
Yeah. So I'm going to disappoint you, but this is my idea, and it relates to you too. And you ended up saying we need to listen, and I would just add a little bit. We need to listen not only to human beings, and that's why films like the Tree of Authenticity really moved us, because we were able to listen to trees. And this is not hippie Julian saying, but taking seriously, the perspective of non-human beings. I think it can play an important role in any solution or action to climate change.
Thank you very much. Very beautifully said. You have the chance to watch the Tree of Authenticity again tomorrow evening, and also the Battle for Laikipia tomorrow evening with Tony again there, having a proper Q&A only with Tony. And now, thanks again for coming, for joining the conversation. I think it was very valuable. Thank you all again, the panelists, for your comments and your insights and all your experience. Maybe that's a round of applause again.